At 800 hours, the skies over Hormuz seemed to split open as general quarters alarms echoed across the U.S. fleet, pushing every ship to maximum combat readiness. What was unfolding was far beyond anything analysts had expected. The destroyer USS Delbert D. Black had locked its SPY-6 fire control radar onto the command center of Iran's $1.5 billion carrier, the Shahed Bagheri. Below the surface, 20 IRGC fast attack craft opened their torpedo tubes, tightening a dangerous pincer around one of the most critical energy corridors on Earth. Overhead, F/A-18ES from the USS Abraham Lincoln thundered through the sky, laser-guided systems fixed on every Shahed drone launcher. One mistake, one rushed decision, and the shockwave would reach far beyond the Gulf, rattling the entire global economy. Iran appeared convinced it had trapped the American giant. But just as its commanders seemed ready to act, a disturbing truth flashed across the radar screens, leaving everyone in stunned silence. Something far more serious was moving in the shadows beneath the sea. The confrontation in the Strait of Hormuz had become more than a regional standoff. It was now a live demonstration of 21st century asymmetric warfare. To understand why Tehran was willing to risk so much prestige on a single operation, you have to look at the unusual logic behind its maritime strategy. Without the industrial capacity to build a conventional aircraft carrier, the IRGC transformed a 250-meter commercial container hull into something entirely different. They added an angled flight deck, mounted rows of one-way drone launchers, and installed Zulfikar missile systems, creating the Shahed Bagheri. On paper, it looked like a slow and vulnerable giant. But in the narrow waters of Hormuz, it served a different purpose, a massive decoy designed to control attention and create paralysis at the world's most important energy choke point. At 8:42 a.m., the standoff took on an even stranger character. As the USS Delbert D. Black held a steady course at 18 knots, the Shahed Bagheri began saturating the air with intense electronic interference. At the same moment, 20 IRGC fast attack craft spread out in a crescent, trying to funnel the American destroyer closer to Iran's rugged coastline. On the Black, the crew remained in strict emissions control silence. But while the SPY-6 radar peeled back the carrier's electronic signature layer by layer, the ship's combat system detected something deeply wrong. The signals pouring off the Iranian vessel were not coming from active drone control stations at all. They were being generated by powerful simulator units mounted on deck. The Shahed Bagheri was not acting as a true combat hub. It was an electronic phantom, a multi-billion-dollar shell meant to draw the American Aegis system into wasting its missile inventory on an empty target. The real danger was elsewhere. While all attention stayed fixed above the waterline, Iran had sent Ghadir-class mini-submarines and unmanned underwater vehicles into position beneath civilian oil tankers passing through the strait. Hidden under those enormous hulls, they used the tanker's engine noise as both physical and acoustic cover. Controllers concealed in the coastal cliffs sent them intermittent low-frequency command bursts, guiding them forward in silence. These underwater platforms were creeping along the seabed less than 2,000 yards from the Black's propellers. That created the nightmare scenario. How do you identify a tiny submerged threat when it is sheltering beneath a 300,000-ton tanker? A wrong response could trigger an environmental and economic disaster on a global scale. By 8:50 a.m., the Hormuz chessboard was dangerously out of balance. The Shahed Bagheri continued snarling on the surface, drawing eyes and sensors toward itself, while beneath the waterline, Iranian mini-subs and unmanned vehicles slipped closer to the USS Delbert D. Black. Their method was brutally clever. They hid beneath the supertanker Majestic Sapphire, using its immense engine roar to bury their own acoustic signature. Finding a mini-sub in that environment was like trying to pick out a whisper in the middle of a packed stadium. Any hasty move by the United States could play directly into Iran's hands. But the U.S. Navy responded with precision, not panic. From the deck of the USS Abraham Lincoln, two MH-60R Seahawk anti-submarine helicopters lifted into the haze and moved toward the tanker formation. They dropped a dense field of passive sonar buoys around the target area, building an underwater listening net in real time. At 9:05 a.m., the Americans began what could only be described as acoustic surgery. Instead of relying on standard filtering methods, the Seahawks used fusion-based processing to strip away layer after layer of tanker noise until the faint low-frequency signatures of the Ghadir-class propellers began to emerge. The U.S. didn't need visual confirmation. It was mapping the seafloor with sound. When Iranian forces realized their underwater screen was being uncovered, the Shahed Bagheri dropped the disguise and escalated openly. It activated its fire control radar and locked onto the Seahawk helicopters, hoping to pressure them into pulling back. The response from the USS Delbert D. Black was measured and cold. Rather than answering with missiles, the Flight 3 destroyer turned to acoustic deception. By altering flow around its propellers and activating simulated acoustic devices, the Black created a false underwater signature. To Iranian sensors, it appeared the American ship had shifted course and moved miles away. In reality, the destroyer remained on track while Iranian underwater units chased a carefully manufactured illusion. That deception opened the door for the next move. While the Iranian side was still trying to sort out the acoustic ghost, the USS Delbert D. Black quietly transmitted the real target coordinates to a Virginia-class submarine operating deep below. In that instant, the hunter became the hunted, and it had no idea the balance had already changed. At 9:15 a.m., inside the command center of the Shahed Bagheri, confidence began to collapse into confusion. Iranian commanders expected to watch the final approach of their large Shahed drone formation as it moved into position. Instead, their displays filled with flickering icons, broken data streams, and system integrity alerts. This was not blunt jamming. It was far more refined. High above the strait, two EA-18G Growlers from the USS Abraham Lincoln had linked with the USS Delbert D. Black's electronic warfare suite, creating a coordinated digital attack. Together, they were not simply blasting interference into the spectrum, they were dissecting the drone swarm's control architecture in real time. Using machine-assisted signal analysis, U.S. operators identified the exact timing intervals and checksum patterns, keeping the swarm synchronized as a single networked force. They did not need to take over every drone. They only needed to corrupt a small fraction of the data packets. Once that happened, the entire formation began to break apart. Flight paths drifted, synchronization failed. Drones began veering off course and colliding with one another in mid-air. To Iranian crews, it looked like some kind of digital infection spreading through the system. At the same time, the U.S. fleet launched an advanced RF fingerprinting effort. Every emergency transmission sent from the Iranian mothership to regain control was intercepted, analyzed, and used to pinpoint the hidden command nodes buried inside the limestone terrain of Qeshm Island. In trying to restore order, Iran revealed the locations of its own most sensitive control infrastructure. The most devastating part of the operation, however, was psychological. The U.S. Navy did not actually seize control of the drones. It only made it appear that way. As Iranian commanders watched parts of the swarm begin to arc back toward their own forces, internal security protocols kicked in. They believed the Americans had compromised the encryption architecture and might redirect the entire formation against the Shahed Bagheri itself. Faced with that possibility, Tehran made a desperate decision. At 9:20 a.m., fearing a full loss of control, Central Command issued an emergency self-destruct order. In moments, thousands of Shahed drones ignited their internal charges and fell burning into the Gulf. Iran's prized asymmetric swarm was erased not by enemy fire, but by the hands of those who launched it. By 9:30 a.m., humiliation had turned into strategic desperation. For the IRGC, losing such a costly asset without visible retaliation was unacceptable. To preserve regional credibility, it reached for its final and most dangerous option, the missile cities. Deep inside the limestone cliffs of Qeshm Island, heavy blast doors rolled open. Fire control radars for Noor anti-ship cruise missiles came alive and locked onto the USS Delbert D. Black. In the narrowest part of the strait, the risk level suddenly surged. The Noor is built for sea-skimming flight, weaving just above the water to reduce reaction time and complicate radar tracking. A saturation launch at that range could ignite an energy shock and push the entire region into open conflict in minutes. Still, the U.S. Navy did not flinch. In a display of pure confidence, the Delbert D. Black held its course at 18 knots. It did not break away. It did not turn for deeper water. It kept moving forward, intentionally exposing its profile as if to say, "We know exactly where you are, and we are not impressed." Then came the next layer of pressure. From the USS Abraham Lincoln, EA-18G Growlers launched MALDJ decoys, digital phantoms able to mimic the radar signature of high-performance aircraft. Suddenly, Iranian radar screens lit up with what looked like dozens of incoming American strike platforms approaching from multiple directions. Tehran's commanders had only seconds to decide. Do they fire their remaining missiles at these apparent threats, exposing their hidden launch sites and inviting an immediate Tomahawk response? Or do they hold fire and absorb a major strategic setback? It was a duel in which the U.S. had already shaped the battlefield, while Iran was still trying to determine which target on the screen was real. At 9:45 a.m., the illusion finally became clear. Iranian commanders realized they had been staring at a digital mirage. Faced with the possibility of losing their underground missile inventory in a counterstrike, they chose preservation over escalation. Fire control radars went dark. Withdrawal orders were issued. The Shahed Bagheri, the $1.5 billion symbol meant to project strength, turned back toward Bandar Abbas under the steady watch of American surveillance. And that was the final twist. The Americans did not sink the Shahed Bagheri because in high-level intelligence warfare, a floating target can be far more valuable than a wreck on the seafloor. Now the ship has become a liability for its own side. Every time it powers up, every time its sensors activate, every movement tells a story. The Pentagon now has a clearer picture of Iranian operating patterns, intentions, and response cycles. This was not just a tactical win, it was a deep intelligence harvest. The U.S. did not seek the confrontation, but it controlled how it ended. In the deep waters of Hormuz, the lesson was unmistakable. The most dangerous threat is not always the one you can see. Sometimes it is the signal behind the signal, the shadow beneath the tanker, the ghost in the spectrum, or the target that never quite appears on the map. What stands out most in this encounter is the discipline behind the American response. Instead of rushing into a dramatic strike, the USS Delbert D. Black and the wider fleet used patience, deception, and systems dominance to dismantle the entire operation piece by piece. That choice may have prevented a much wider crisis. The question is whether restraint was the smartest show of strength or whether a harder response would have delivered a clearer message.